the French Revolution, the revolutionaries in the cities, these laborers and artisans and shopkeepers, I want you to put this down about them. They are pretty secular. The people living in the cities tend to not be very oriented towards traditional Christianity. People in the countryside, their poor counterparts in the countryside tend to be very religious. And that's going to create some new cultural frictions. And that's the other thing I think I'd like you to write down about parties. Parties coalesce around economic policies and shared cultural values. That's another place for people to come together. When the French Revolution attacked the church out of this Enlightenment rage at the role that the church had played before, right? They believed that the church had accumulated all this wealth and had taken advantage of the people of France for centuries now. And they confiscated all the land of the church, and they made the church clergy paid employees of the state. That does not make conservative Christians in France very happy. And then Robespierre, you'll see what he did with the Notre Dame? Him renaming it. He named it the Temple of Virtue. He got rid of Christianity altogether. He tried to kill Christianity in France. And that's the most radical element of the French Revolution. It's now attacking traditional French culture, and that's going to be problematic. It's going to irritate the countryside. They're going to say this revolution, these revolutionaries in the city are messed up people. So we've got lots of moving parts in European society now. And we have to come up with policies, however, that are going to guide us. And that is why the whole thing comes crashing down with the Directory and the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. This is the theme here, I'd like you to know. The Thermidorian reaction was when Robespierre was overthrown. And they're tired of the terror. And by the way, the reason that all goes away, or begins to go away, is because they've actually won the battles against the European monarchs who were trying to intercede and stop the French Revolution. What happens now is after the Thermidorian reaction, they don't want this Committee of Public Safety, and they rewrite onto their, I think, third constitution. And this one is going to have the Directory, a 5-person committee to be the executive of France. Have you ever heard of an executive by committee? Does that sound like a very good idea? At least it's 5, you could have a majority. But the 5 members of the Directory come out of Parliament, so that rather than having a prime minister who makes ultimate decisions, we've got 5 people who sit around a committee and hate on each other. Because the different parties get to send their own representative. So what we get is absolutely ineffective executive government in France. And things are falling apart. And that's when we get the arrival of the man on the horse. And this is a theme for you. When society is going to hell in a handbasket, when there's internal struggle between different economic groups, and they're battling it out and they cannot function, and democracy can't function, and they've got disorder, we almost always have a military man take over. And that's what this is. That's the man on the horse. It's a person who rides in and says, I'm the lawgiver, and I'm going to organize society, and I'm the decider. And democracy isn't this great idea. So that's Napoleon Bonaparte. From 1795 to 1799, the French are kind of trying to absorb what they just got through. They've got this Directory trying to govern. And the War of the First Coalition has calmed down. But Napoleon Bonaparte, as an ID for you, probably more Italian than French. He was born on Corsica when it was still an Italian province, but it became part of France in the 1750s until he was a French citizen growing up. He is a petty nobleman. He's come from an aristocratic class, but they didn't have much money. He got sent to military school to try to have an income as a military officer, since he didn't have enough land to make a nice income for himself. At age 15, he enters into the military during the war, the first coalition, when the Prussians are coming in and the Austrians are coming in. And he is an artillery commander. He's in an artillery unit. And he quickly rises up as a very efficient, effective at using artillery and moving things around. He ends up becoming the youngest general that France has by the mid-1790s. In 1795, the Directory was having difficulty with a crowd in Paris that didn't like the policies they were passing. And they came out as big demonstrators. Did y'all see the demonstrations in Ukraine recently? And all those? They actually got it worked out, didn't they? They got the president deposed. They fought so hard, although, what, about 40 of them got killed? Some of them point blank by security forces. Napoleon is called in as a commander of the artillery to help control the crowd in Paris, who seems to be on the point of overthrowing the Directory. And he says to his squad there, let's give them, and the quote is, a whiff of grape shot. And grape shot, you know what grape shot is? In a what is it?
The little smaller beads.
Yes, you get real small little pieces of, it's like for shooting birds, right? So it spreads out. It's not as lethal as, say, a slug. And so he fires on the crowd with grape shot. So they're going to get wounded, and but it's going to make them all run. I guess I'd run too if some cannons were being fired into the crowd with little BBs in it. He is willing to use force on the people to enforce order. And as we get a political breakdown in Paris, Napoleon, people begin to coalesce around him. Here he's somebody who knows how to protect France from foreign invasions. He's somebody who's beginning to understand the political process. Fortunately for him, he's got brothers. His brother is in the parliament. And he finally tells Napoleon, it's now. This is the time for you to do the Julius Caesar thing. You need to be in Paris. And so he comes to Paris, and there's a coup against the Directory. And they write yet another constitution. They get rid of the Directory. That's not working for us to have 5 people as president. And they say we need 1. And they go back to the Roman style. The Romans had, as a republic, placed all the power in the old wealthy aristocratic families who controlled the Senate. But they did not want an emperor to emerge, so they only gave executive authority to a person who was known as consul. But that person only had a year to serve as consul. So here's the thing with the French. They don't want to go back to a king, right? An old aristocratic king, because they've had enough of kings. But they also need executive authority because things are going crazy in France. We've got to have order in society. They think this will work. And so they elect Napoleon as consul for 1 year. And he does a good job at beginning to organize the state and the apparatus of the government. And he is re-elected in 1801. And then he passes a law making himself consul for life. So you see that he almost immediately gets rid of democracy. And this is the struggle of all nations. This is something I need you to kind of realize as you think about modern politics. Do y'all know the name of the prime minister, well, the main leader of Russia? I can't remember what his current office is that he holds. The main leader of Russia. His name is Putin. Have you heard of him? P-U-T-I-N, Putin. He emerged after the chaos of the 1980s and 90s to bring law and order and stability to Russia. But he was only supposed to serve for a couple of years. He's been serving there since the 1991 coup. That's a while now, right? And he has managed to, again, take away... There's always this is a big theme for us, is how do we get maximum liberty for individual people and not have chaos? We're trading security for liberty. And we don't want to make that trade. But you'd rather have security, potentially, where you don't have armed bandits roaming the streets, where you don't have drug lords now controlling the oil industry, and you don't have all this corruption in government. You don't want that. You want security and good government. But you get people like Napoleon Bonaparte, and they don't think they can ever go away. And so he gets rid of liberty, but I will say this about him, he's a very smart new leader. In the organic articles, your ID there, he rolls out a new law code for all of France, and they're known as the Organic Articles, a new law, the Napoleonic Law Code. It's going to supersede and get rid of all of the old laws of France that had gone back to, I don't know, probably the time of the Frank invasion in about 400 AD. These are these old customary laws that had gone over since the medieval period. He's going to get rid of all those laws. Some of those laws have been clerical laws, ecclesiastical laws. Some of them had been laws for the aristocrats. He gets rid of them all. Here's a couple things. It does not recognize titled aristocrats. There is no longer the three estates. Here's the big theme. Equality before the law. So I want you to write down about that one. It'll be on your... This established a concept of equality before the law. What that's telling the French people is that he is preserving some of the most popular elements of the French Revolution. And one of the most popular things was to get rid of the aristocrats and their lordship over the people. No more hat-in-hand Frenchmen as the lords go by on their steeds and through the streets. No more are there special juries and chambers for the aristocrats to have their trials. They are all equal before the law. So that's one big preservation there. He does also in this bring back Christianity and the Catholic Church into a special privileged position. This is a smart move on his part. He knows that the church is a highly important element in culture. And that if you take out the foundations of religion, like Robespierre tried to make this, he thought that people could basically think themselves into virtue. But most of the people of the streets of Paris, they haven't had a lot of opportunity to develop virtue in their life, have they? They haven't had that background. And so all they do is end up butchering each other and taking advantage of each other, and they've lost their ethical, moral compass. So that's one reason that Napoleon brings back the church, is because we need a foundation for moral order, and within that is the protection of property, is a very essential thing within the Judeo-Christian tradition. Also, it pleases the more conservative elements of society, like in the countryside, that this is who we are. Now, I want you to know this. He allows religious freedom in France. You don't have to be Catholic. Remember that prior to the French Revolution, they did not tolerate anyone but Catholics in France. It was against the law to be anything but Catholic. So he is tolerating religious differences, but he's given a privileged position to the church. And as a result, the church will sanction his leadership. And this is something I want you to think about. He is shoring up support for the popularity of his government. If the church every Saturday and Sunday at Mass says, let's say, a prayer for Napoleon, I've seen them, they have a recitation. Let me go and add this to it. The church is going to be responsible for primary education in France. The church will be able to shape the coming generations of students through primary school. The universities will be independent from the church influence, but all education through the secondary level is really in the hands of the church. And they are saying prayers to Napoleon every day, and they are putting him on a pedestal. He's the one who brought order for us. He's the one we want to praise. All of that is shoring up his support. He's not going to have any serious challenges to his rule, even though he has just gotten rid of democracy. And he has made himself first consul for life, and then he decides, what the heck, emperor sounds better. And he crowns himself. He was going to have the bishop, I think the Pope actually came from Italy to France. But at the very last moment, he does not let the Pope crown him. He grabs the crown himself, and he crowns himself, right? So the Pope's here, right? But when it comes down to it, I am the ultimate authority in France, and there is no higher power than me. And so we now, y'all understand how Napoleon's emerged as this, and how the French people are liking security. Now, this is the next ID for you, the prefect. He reorganizes France. France had all these old provinces that had these unusual names. And they were all, went back to the medieval period, to this baron, or that baron, or this duchy. He gets rid of all those old medieval districts, and he creates departments. I think there are 45 of them. Prefects. Today they're called departments. What would we call those for ourselves? Probably counties, right? Counties in Tennessee. Now here's what he does. Each county has got a prefect. But each prefect has got a leader, an executive. So in a little way, it's like a governor for the prefect. How do we elect our governor? Well, how do we, I'm giving it away. We elect our governors, don't we? Does Napoleon ask the people of a prefect to appoint their own and elect it? He's going to say, no, I will appoint the prefect for each one. And they're his men. And they're going to carry out his will. And they're going to be looking out for anybody who disagrees with him. But these prefects are very, very well organized. He picks men who are competent. They administer law. They administer justice. They are going to have a police force with them. He also asks them, by the way, I want to know everything that's going on in your prefect. What's your grapes there? How many cattle do you have? What's the timber like there? What are the mineral deposits there? How many people live there? What are your waterways? I want to know about your resources. When Napoleon goes to war with all of Europe, France is going to need resources, right? And he's also going to be able to tell the prefect, I need 100 units, right? I need out of your division. How many people do you got? How many are this age? I need you guys to train and muster this many men, and I need them in Paris in 6 months. So this Napoleon is about to create the first modern state in Europe. Is he authoritarian? Yes, he is. Is he putting people out on the streets on guillotines? He hasn't restored the old order of aristocrats. He hasn't taken away freedom of religion. He has accomplished a lot of what France wanted, and he is the governor of them. And they're saying every day, most of them are saying, thank you God for Napoleon, right? Napoleon gets into another war with his enemies. The Prussians don't like him, and the Austrians don't like him, the English don't even like him, the Spanish don't like him. And we have another coalition of war against the French, but this time they're so organized, and they've got a military leader over them who's a brilliant military leader. He's going to take these great resources of France, and he's going to direct it, and he's going to crush all of his enemies in Europe. Defeats the Austrian Empire, and they have to agree to never go to war with him. The Russians get defeated by him up here near Poland. The Prussians and the other Germanic groups, he creates something called the Confederation of the Rhine out of them and makes them basically a puppet state to France. He takes over Belgium and the Netherlands. Over the Italian states, he places his family members over them. Spain is in a neutral position. He's the dominant power of Europe by about 1805, 1806. He tries to go over here and take Egypt. He gets in a big battle with England. There's only one group out there that is keeping up a contest with Napoleon, and that's England. What England has begun to realize is they don't want any one power dominating Europe. And so they're trying to intervene to prevent that. Trafalgar is a big naval engagement between Napoleon's Navy and the British Navy. They slug it out with thousands of ships. It's the largest naval engagement, I think, still of all time. England barely pulls it off. And France has to give up the waters to England. And so Napoleon cannot contemplate an invasion of England because he can't get there. The British control the water. By the way, this is a period in American history we get sucked into a war over this, right? We get angry at the British because they are stopping our ships and pulling sailors off, impressment, as it was called, because they had lost so many sailors in the Battle of Trafalgar. They were looking for new ones. That ends up making the Americans angry again. Now, the continental system, as an ID for you real quickly. The continental system is the requirement that all of the European countries not trade with England. Napoleon makes all the European countries not trade with England. That's called the continental system. Why would he do that? What was that?
He's going to starve them of supplies.
Starve them of supplies. And who does he get to hurt? He can't reach them because they're Navy, right? But he could hurt them economically. This is the economic leverage he's using on them. Fine, you got all this merchant class that's become so wealthy there, and they're the ones in the driver's seat. Good luck selling things here in Europe. You're going to be out of business. So he's trying to get the British to come to terms with him and accept his domination of Europe, but they won't do it. This is going to be the same plan that Winston Churchill will use 120 years later when he's up against Adolf Hitler. We just simply don't agree to end the war with them. Now, can England knock out France? There's no way they can get an army and get over there and defeat him. So currently, Napoleon's got control. But what I'd like you to know is his continental system has a bit of hubris to it. Hubris, I think I've given you this word before. It's proud, haughty, him getting too big of a head, him thinking that him letting his ego get in the way. The Russians end up getting a little annoyed at this, and the Austrians do too. And let me go ahead and tell you what predates this. Down here in Portugal, an uprising begins. And the British are supporting an uprising down here against Napoleonic rule. Napoleon says, aha, I'll go get you. So he comes down here to fight in Portugal. He irritates the Spanish people a lot, and kind of a Spanish civil war begins against him, the average people not being happy with the troops. That's not so bad until the Russians. They sense that he is tied down over here in the Iberian Peninsula, and they proclaim that they are no longer going to abide by his continental system. They're basically kind of declaring their independence from his political rule. That leads to Napoleon getting angry. And he says, okay, then I'm going to come teach the Russian Tsar a lesson. And so he gathers about 100,000 man army, and he marches them from France across the German states, through Poland, and starts headed for Moscow in this long march. Now, all along the way, he's got a better military than the Russians do. And he's able to defeat their forces. And what they do is they simply keep backing up. But every time they backed up, they did a scorched earth policy. They burned everything. The Russians burn everything that they can't take with them. Why are they doing that as they withdraw in? Excellent. His supplies are stretching all the way back to Warsaw, which is getting further and further as his army gets closer. He's trying to get to Moscow. He gets to Moscow in November. And when he gets there, the city is being abandoned. There's not very many people there. He's like, what's the deal? He's expecting this to be the end of it, right? The Russians surely will have to enter into agreement with me here. He gets in the city. He's like, what is this? The city's burning. There's ash coming out. The Russians have set fire to Moscow so that he doesn't have a center of power. And then he realizes as ash and snow start coming down, what's he thinking? What happens?
He gets stuck in the middle of Russian winter.
I'd better get out of here. I don't have anything to feed my people. And so he now realizes he's got to get out of Russia. And so he starts going back, and the snows come down. And then the Russians start a counterattack, and they harass him all the way. He only gets out with 20,000 troops out of the 100,000. The other 80,000 get killed by the Russian winter and the Russian troops. His power is now broken, and this finally results in this war of coalitions. And I think the ID that I want to give you here is the Battle of Nations, and then of course probably know Waterloo. But at the Battle of Nations in 1814, Napoleon, he's finally defeated by a multinational coalition to stop this dominant power. So, what do we make of Napoleon? How does Europe feel about him? Jerk, right? who didn't accede to the interests of other people and put the interests of France and his own ego against others, and loved military conquest. What did the French people think about him? Loved him. Thought he was great. He had undermined their democracy, but they got what they were really looking for. By the way, he gets put on an island, first in the Mediterranean, and he escapes briefly. I'll explain that. He fights again, has to get beat again at Waterpool. Then they finally put him out at Elba, and he apparently might have been poisoned to death because he was going to live for a while. He was a young, I think young man. How did the French feel about him? They build a tomb for him. They asked for his body to be brought back to Paris, and they build this magnificent tomb for Napoleon. So, we had this mixed message there. He brought order out of chaos. He gave the French people so much of what they want. This is, in some ways, I want you to write this down, a proto-fascist model. Proto-fascist is kind of pre-fascist. You don't know what fascism means yet, do you? Fascism. Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler were fascists. Anti-democratic, strong on security, stressing national glory. They're basically pulling out Napoleon's handbook for how to organize and create a strong state with not democracy, but with... Now, in Napoleon's case, he built a coalition of men because he was a military man. What the Italians under Mussolini and the Germans will do, they'll form parties that have an ideology at the center. So this is the first manifestation, I suppose, of fascism. All right, those are all those IDs. Now we'll go on to Metternich. What have I done with on your screen here? I put some cartoons on it. I don't know who that is. It's Humpty Dumpty. How does that go? All the king's horses and all the king's men. I think that Humpty Dumpty is the old regime. He's the old system of aristocracy in Europe. And it's my opinion that the French Revolution, that this little poem is about once it's fallen off the wall, even all this effort to put back the old regime again, I'm sure, I don't know if there's any chance at all that was what they were thinking. I've never looked into it. But the French Revolution greatly challenges Humpty Dumpty in Europe. Now, the Congress of Vienna and Metternich. Do you remember why these wars broke out between France and the European countries? Why did that start happening? And when did that start happening? Do you have a sense of that? Help me out here. Why did the Austrians and Prussians attack France?
1814.
And so these guys are monarchs too. And they want to come to the aid of monarchy. That was in 1794 we had this. When is Napoleon defeated? 1814. So it's been about 20 years, right, of warfare. And Napoleon has reorganized the furniture all over Europe. He's created the Confederation of Rhineland. He's put new people in power in Italy, in Belgium, in the Netherlands. And now there's a big question of how do we make things right? And that's what the purpose of the Concert of Vienna is to put back together the old regime and figure out who's supposed to be where and to restore order, well, to restore things. Now the dominant powers are Great Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia, and these are the new power players for the rest of the European century that is emerging. They meet in Vienna, Austria, and the principal organizer is your ID, Prince von Metternich. He is the foreign minister of Austria. He's the one who called for this international conference. And that is the empire that he serves. It's called the Austrian Empire. And the capital is Vienna. How big is it today? It's pretty small. They make chocolate, have insurance companies and banking companies now. I mean, at a time, they were a great empire which controlled other nationalities. What these colors here are, how about this, subject nationalities to the Austrians. So they've got Poles and Bohemian people like the Czechs and the Slovakians and Slovenians and Croatians and Bosnians and Serbians and Hungarians, and over here some Italians, and they are all under the control of the dominant Austrian-German group. Are these people happy about being under control of the Germanic? They are not. They want their independence. So, Metternich, when he's at Vienna, he becomes the primary organizer of resistance to change. And he's got two things he wants to defeat. He wants to defeat liberalism and nationalism. He's committed to conserving or preserving the old aristocratic order, where you have absolute monarchs who don't rule with a parliament, unless the parliament's called just a little bit, and if there is a parliament, it's going to be mostly that upper group, and maybe we'll begin to bring in some of our wealthy merchant class, but certainly not these people down here in the lower orders, who also might be other ethnic groups. Russia's got the same thing going on. It's got also lots of different ethnic groups. So here's a couple definitions from you. Nationalism is a political viewpoint that a nation is composed of a people who are joined by the common bond of language, customs, culture, and history. There is a Polish nationality, right? They've got a distinct way that they do their customs, how they celebrate Christmas, how they celebrate Easter, what they think about, their stories, their folklore, all of that, and their language themselves, all make them up as the Polish nation. Now, where is the Polish nation? In 1815, it's in Russia, it's in Austria, and it's in Prussia. They do not have their own nation state, but the Polish nation is the people. But the people are separated into different countries in which they do not have rights. So they're going to be a frustrated group, because the Prussians are going to not give them rights and treat them poorly. And the Russians are going to treat them poorly, and the Austrians are. Nationalists believe that their people constitute a nation through these shared identifiable bonds, and believe that they should be governed by authorities from within their own nation. That's what nationalists are. Could be a Cuban nationalist later on. Could be a Vietnamese nationalist later on. Could be an Arab nationalist later on. People who believe that their nation is not under its self-control. All right. Why do you think that Metternich wants to stop the idea of nationalism?
You completely destroy the Austrian.
There you go. Exactly. It would completely destroy the Austrian Empire. If they would all be broken up. What would they do? Create some kind of league of former Austrian countries? Now, liberalism. You're going to have to get rid of your idea today of liberalism. Liberalism today is an activist government involved in trying to create fairer society. Liberalism, initially, this is called classical liberalism. Liberals oppose arbitrary governments, and they advocated an expansion of political, economic, and religious freedom. Liberalism is freedom from government in your life. When we laid out the Bill of Rights in the American Constitution that I went over last time, those are liberties. Those are our civil liberties against government telling us what we're going to do with our lives. And it's going to make a government responsive to the people. Liberalism is a middle-class movement. It is this upper group up here. It's the merchant class, it's the commerce banking, it's probably the shopkeepers too. They like the idea of it. Middle-class movement that was not particularly concerned about the economic and social problems of the masses. This group right here, these new merchant capitalists, they're interested in creating governments that are responsive to their interests, but they're not that interested in the full-fledged concept of democracy where everybody votes. But they do want civil liberties, including the freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, freedom from arbitrary arrest and imprisonment. That is what our Bill of Rights all encompass right there. That's the ideas of classical liberal philosophy. Now, Metternich doesn't want democracy either in Austria. Because if you let the people determine their own leaders, what are all the Czech people going to do? They're going to try to withdraw, right? So he's got to oppose the two biggest forces unleashed by the French Revolution. and the American Revolution, you could say too. The forces that have been unleashed are the forces of liberalism, of liberty, freedom for individuals, and the concept of nationalism, which really is a hallmark of the French Revolution too, and even of Napoleon, because he's telling the people of France, we may not all have the same amount of money, you may not have as much as somebody else, but guess what you all are? You're all French. And you can glory in the national achievements. You can participate in the way you feel about yourself to know that your country is doing these great things. And as the French would march through other countries, you had these proud French soldiers who wore their colors and had a lot of pride. And that makes other groups start thinking, nationalism. Well, the French think they're all it. And so the Prussians, they think they're it. But now, how is Metternich going to stop all this? He wants the Vienna Congress to not just be a time of reorganizing. He tries to build a coalition that are all committed to stopping democracy and nationalism. And this is your ID, the Holy Alliance. He gets together Russia, Prussia, and Austrian monarchs. They're all monarchs. And they're all conservative, and none of them have constitutions for their people. They're all going to support Christianity. By the way, the French Revolution freaks out Europeans because they've thrown off Christianity, and look what happened. They killed 16,000 of each other, and it was blood in the streets, and it was chaos, and it was a lack of appreciation for order. And these guys see the church as the main cultural tradition, and the church supports monarchy, and the church supports aristocracy, because the Judeo-Christian tradition, especially in the Christian tradition, there is this very conservative idea put forward by Peter and Paul that all governments are put in power by God, and that He is in control of all this, and we as Christians are supposed to obey the leadership that we find ourselves with. That is the Christian tradition. And so that's why it's called the Holy Alliance. They all want to stress Christianity as a bulwark against the godless French Revolution. The French Revolution was godless because they were so frustrated and what the church had done in France with the aristocracy. So, the Holy Alliance, to preserve the system of monarchy and aristocracy, and to maintain our strong cultural traditions in Europe. Great Britain can't really get on board for this because they are both nationalistic and they are democratic and they have a constitutional monarchy. But Great Britain does like the idea of a concert of Europe. And that's your next ID. The concert of Europe. Don't know what a concert is? Singing together like in a symphony. A symphony is when things are being played together as opposed to a cacophony, which is when everything is like not sounding good together. A concert is the organization of Europe into union and unity. That's what he means by this concert of Europe. These major monarchs are going to try to make sure that they intercede anywhere they need to stop liberalism and to stop democracy. These guys are on the wrong side of history, you could say, in many ways, because we live in a society which is going to get rid of at least the political order that they had. Let me say one last thing about the concert of Europe. Each of these men do what you could basically call a living will. Do you know what a living will is? It's when you say if you're incapacitated and you're on life support, you're going to tell the doctor, if they'll listen to you, if they'll abide by it, what your will is for yourself. These guys all say, in the event that my people overthrow me, I'm pre-authorizing an intervention by Austrian forces, by French forces. Y'all think about the shift that's taken place. In the 1700s, these nations were all at each other's throats, weren't they? The War of Jenkins' Ear, the 7 Years' War, the War of Austrian Secession. Guess what they figured out? They were each other's enemies before, but now who's the enemy? Their own people. Their own people are potentially their biggest threat to their lives and their monarchy. And so it's their system against all the people below. And that's what the concert of Europe is about, is to try to maintain the old system as long as possible. All right, we've gotten through quite a few there, haven't we? The Vienna Congress, they try to act through something they call the principle of legitimacy. They're trying to put the legitimate dynasties back on the throne of their respective countries. So the French should have the Bourbon monarchy back. But what's happened to the monarchy in France? What happened to Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI? They've been decapitated by the revolution. Their son, who would have been Louis XVII, died in a prison in Paris. And so what happens is Louis XVI had two brothers, and they're going to bring in one of his brothers, and he will take the name Louis, and he goes ahead and says Louis' son would have been the 17th, so I take the number 18. Your ID for him, and I wanted to go ahead and come down here to it, if you would, put Charter of 1814. Charter is the French word for Constitution. Napoleon is off on an island in the Atlantic, slowly being poisoned. And Louis XVIII, the brother of the dead Louis XVI, comes to France, and he's now got to come. How are the French going to receive him? They loved Napoleon, right? How are they going to receive the Bourbon kings back? Are they going to like that? They're going to hate it. And Louis realizes that. And because guess what? The War of the Coalition, they're all going to go home. And he's going to be left with the French people. Can he restore the old regime? No, without threatening himself. He's going to have a revolution, isn't he? So he's smart. He gives the people of France the Charter of 1814, which he agrees to be a constitutional monarch like England. He creates a bicameral Congress. There's a Chamber of Deputies and Chamber of Peers. And he will pick his own prime minister. And Congress won't have much authority. He does preserve the Napoleonic Code, however, I will say that. And he does preserve religious freedom in France. He kind of cuts it in the middle. And he'll be okay for a little while. This is something called the German Confederation. When we first started this class, there was something called the Holy Roman Empire, which went back to Charlemagne in 800 AD. It was a combination of about 300 principalities, little German, mostly German-speaking groups. Over the years, we've had some emperors who tried to consolidate power, like Charles V, but they were resistant. But here's what the I guess you can say this: Napoleon killed the Holy Roman Empire when he created the Confederation of the Rhineland. But we now want to put back onto power different legitimate authorities, but what they decided to do is to create 39 states. There used to be 300 and something principalities. They've got it down to 39. And we have a big rivalry within this 39. Look how big Prussia has become now. It used to be, they also control this area over here. Prussia is a major player in the new Confederation. Austria is put in the German Confederation too. There's 39 states. Austria and Vienna, but not the rest of the Austrian Empire. This is basically the German-speaking people. They decide to create a confederation government for them. That's what I'd like you to know about that. They form a confederation. That means they are going to have an apparatus for talking to each other. They don't have any one executive. A confederation is when you have a combination of completely independent states working together. What will we eventually get out of this, do you suppose? Germany, the German part. But it's still a little ways away. It's not going to be until 1870. They have a rotating president for the Confederation Committee. Austria, Prince von Metternich, he wants to use this confederation to stop liberalism and nationalism. And all of these 39 monarchs, they promise not to give their subjects a constitution and to suppress the idea that there ought to be a German nation. This is a bit of a problem for the Germans. They would like to come together. Some of them would like to come together as one nation, but that would get rid of a lot of the lower monarchs. All right. So we've talked about the continent of Europe, and that's the effort to preserve the monarchs. They've realized that their biggest threat is their people. Alexander I, ID for you, he's the Russian Tsar. And he is like uber Christian. And he, by the way, he ends up getting rid of a lot of the Russian forces who had been present in France because they're going to bring back ideas with them of liberty. And so he ends up putting them basically in prison camps. And we've got the Holy Alliance, the German Confederation, liberalism, nationalism. I'm going to go to the Peterloo Massacre. Britain has got power sharing going on because it's got Parliament, right? It's got the House of Lords and the House of Commons. In the House of Commons, so far, the merchant class have moved up and really are affecting government policy because they're picking the Prime Minister. But we're beginning to get a problem. Who's not represented in Parliament very well? Which one? Thank you. And which ones? Like the people who just have so little, and they're working in warehouses, they're working unloading ships, they're painting ships, they're building. They are hungry. Their numbers are swelling. Their population is growing in England. They're being forced out of the countryside, and they are coming to places like London, and they're looking for bread and a place to live, and they want policies that favor them. There's an economic downturn after the Napoleonic Wars, and it's rough times in London, it's rough times in Liverpool and other places. And so the demonstrators come out in large number, and they meet at St. Peter's Field outside of London for a mass demonstration to say, we want Parliament to pass these laws that help us. One of the laws they wanted to get rid of was an import tax on corn and wheat. America, we had wheat to sell in England, but the English gentry didn't want American wheat coming in because the Americans could make it and ship it to England cheaper than the gentry could. So you've got people starving in England because the gentry have passed a policy to tax imported wheat because it benefits them. This is the whole big thing I've been getting across to you. This is the question of economic policy. Governments and Congresses make policies like tariff laws. But guess what? If one group who's well off, they're only thinking about themselves, aren't they, very naturally? But at the expense of all these other people. So these people who come out here, they want democratic reforms. They want to be able to vote, but they're not able to vote. They've got property qualifications. Now, there is fear in Great Britain that the revolution in America and the revolution in France is attacking propertied people, the propertied class up here. And they think that these demonstrators out here are going to want to do that too. So, the Peterloo Massacre is when Lord Liverpool, who's the new British Prime Minister, unleashes the military on the people. You already may remember in the 1689 Bill of Rights, or the Glorious Revolution, it said that the military cannot be used on the civilian population without the approval of Parliament. Do you think Parliament's going to approve? No, they are. Because Parliament isn't these... Does Parliament want these guys to vote? Are they going to vote for the gentry's laws? Are they going to vote for these new commercial laws that the merchants want to break the power of the guilds and such? So we've got divergent policies, and so they unleash the military on the people, and many civilians are killed. Just like these demonstrations we know today, right? All right, now we get the 6 acts as an ID for you. Britain now goes conservative. They had been going towards a trend of more freedom for people, but now they're afraid of their working poor class. They're desperately poor people in England. So the 6 acts take away a lot of civil liberties for English. They no longer have the freedom of assembly, like at Petersfield. It takes away the freedom of the press. It does not require trial by jury for people accused of political crimes. It allows for censorship of what's being published in Britain to stop revolutionary ideas. So England's kind of bowing up and going conservative. I guess what we call this is a reaction. This is being reactionary. The French Revolution has created fear among the propertied people of Europe, whether they be the aristocratic groups of propertied people over here or the commercial propertied people of England. They're all freaked out by these new hordes of people who are desperately poor. And out of fear they react, and they want to bring the government down on the people. All right? And America is like going on and leading the way in democracy over here and saying civil liberties and such. In fact, your ID there, Jacksonian democracy. It's a little later, but during the 1820s and 1830s in America, we get rid of voting restrictions. When the colonies first became states, they had property qualifications to be able to vote. But by the 1820s and 1830s, they've all made it so that every white male can vote. And that's what's going to end up becoming known as Jacksonian democracy. Jackson is going to be a leader of the average Americans, small farmers and artisans and shopkeepers. He's the man of the people, is Andrew Jackson. And he's going to be up against the elites. In fact, he says the elites of America, the Alexander Hamiltons and the John Quincy Adams and all those guys, they're all about running policy for themselves. And he, Andrew Jackson, is going to stop those kind of political policies that only help the wealthy. All right.